I was 30 years old when I finally understood the truth. I wasn't the problem child. I wasn't difficult, broken, or too sensitive. I was the scapegoat they needed me to be. For 3 decades, I believed every word they said about me. I tried harder, I smiled more, I stayed quiet, but nothing I did was ever enough. And the day I watched my mother treat my daughter the exact same way she treated me, that was the moment everything changed. Growing up, I heard the same phrases on repeat. Why can't you be more like your sister? You're too emotional. You always cause problems. I internalized every single word. I believed I was the issue. That if I just tried a little harder, maybe they'd finally see me. Maybe they'd finally love me the way they loved her. My sister, Sarah, was the golden child. Everything she did was perfect. She forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. That was fine. She was busy. I forgot to call my mother on Mother's Day once because I was at the hospital with my sick daughter. I was selfish and ungrateful. The standards were never equal. But I thought, maybe I deserved it? When I was 8 years old, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table. I remember the yellow wallpaper behind them, the way my father avoided eye contact. My mother spoke calmly, like she was explaining a math problem. Your sister needs more attention right now. She's struggling in school. You're strong. You'll understand. I nodded. I wanted to be the good daughter. So I learned to need less, to ask for less, to be less. But less became my identity. In high school, I got straight A's. My parents said, "That's expected." Sarah scraped by with C's. They threw her a party when she got 1B. I made the honor roll every semester. They forgot to come to the ceremony. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was strong enough not to need their validation. When I got accepted to college on a full scholarship, my mother's first question was, "How will Sarah feel about this?" Not congratulations, not pride, just concern for how my success might hurt my sister's feelings. So I downplayed it. I made myself smaller. Again. I got married at 25. My husband David was kind and patient. He noticed things my family never did. He'd ask, "Why do you apologize so much?" Or, "Why do you flinch when someone raises their voice?" I didn't have answers. I just thought, that's who I was. The anxious one. The oversensitive one. The one who always caused tension. When I had my daughter, Emma, I promised myself I'd be different. I'd be the mother I never had. I'd make her feel seen, heard, valued. And for 7 years, I did. But I still brought her to my parents' house every Sunday, because that's what good daughters do, right? I lived like that for 30 years, believing I was the problem, believing I deserved the coldness, the criticism, the constant comparisons. Until one Sunday afternoon in late September, when I brought my 7-year-old daughter to my parents' house for lunch. What I saw that day, I'll never forget. It was the moment I finally understood the problem was never me. Let me take you back, because this pattern didn't start that Sunday. It started when I was a child. I need you to understand how deep this goes, how invisible it was to me for so long. I was 8 years old when my parents first told me I needed to be less. My sister was struggling in school. She was falling behind in reading, acting out in class, getting into trouble. My parents were worried, and instead of getting her help, they decided the solution was to shift all their attention to her, which meant taking it away from me. They sat me down and explained, "Sarah needs us right now. You're doing fine. You're strong. You don't need as much." I remember nodding. I remember feeling proud that they thought I was strong. I didn't realize they were teaching me that my needs didn't matter, that my job was to disappear so someone else could shine. From that point on, I became invisible. I learned to solve my own problems. I learned not to cry when I was hurt. I learned to celebrate my achievements alone in my room, because bringing them to my parents meant watching them find a way to diminish them or redirect the conversation to Sarah. I learned that love was conditional, and the condition was, don't need anything. When I was 12, I won a regional science fair. I was so excited. I ran home with the trophy, bursting through the door. My mother was on the phone. She held up one finger. Wait. I waited. 20 minutes later, she hung up. I showed her the trophy. She smiled briefly and said, "That's nice, honey. Can you set the table? Sarah's having a hard day." I set the table. I put the trophy in my closet. I never mentioned it again. When I was 16, I applied for a summer internship at a research lab. It was competitive. I worked so hard on that application. I got in. I told my parents at dinner. My father said, "That's good." My mother said, "Will you still have time to help Sarah with her college essays?" I said yes. Of course I said yes, because that's what I did. I made myself smaller so Sarah could take up more space. When I was 22, I graduated college summa cum laude. My parents came to the ceremony. So did Sarah. During the reception, my mother spent the entire time introducing Sarah to my professors, talking about Sarah's job search, Sarah's plans. I stood there, in my cap and gown, holding my diploma, invisible. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I didn't need their attention. I was strong, remember? But I wasn't strong. I was trained. Trained to believe my accomplishments didn't matter, trained to believe my feelings were too much, trained to believe that if I just tried harder, needed less, smiled more, maybe one day I'd be enough. But that day never came, because the problem was never me. For years, I carried this weight. I thought it was mine. I thought I was the difficult one, the sensitive one, the one who always caused problems. I believed it so deeply that when people treated me poorly, I thanked them. When people dismissed my pain, I apologized for feeling it. Until the day I saw my mother look at my daughter the exact same way she used to look at me, and something clicked. That night, after I put Emma to bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing her face, the way she'd shrunk, the way she'd apologized for existing. I'd seen that look before, in the mirror, for 30 years. I sat down at my laptop. My hands were shaking. I typed, "Why does my mother blame me for everything?" Then I deleted it. Too specific. Too vulnerable. I typed "family scapegoat." The search results loaded, and my entire childhood made sense. There were articles, forums, entire communities of people describing exactly what I'd lived through. I learned that in dysfunctional families, there's often a role assignment, not spoken, not official, but rigid, unbreakable. The golden child who can do no wrong. The scapegoat who becomes the emotional dumping ground for the family's dysfunction. I read about how scapegoats are blamed for things beyond their control, how their achievements are minimized or ignored, how their pain is dismissed as overreacting or being too sensitive, how they're trained from childhood to accept mistreatment as normal, how they grow up believing they're fundamentally flawed. Because if everyone around you treats you like you're the problem, you start to believe it. I read about parentification, how scapegoat children are often forced to be emotionally mature beyond their years, to manage their parents' feelings, to sacrifice their own needs for the golden child. I thought about all the times I'd comforted my mother when she was upset about Sarah, all the times I'd mediated arguments, all the times I'd been told, "You're so mature for your age," as if that was a compliment and not a warning sign. I read about trauma responses, how scapegoats develop hypervigilance, people-pleasing, perfectionism, how they struggle with self-worth because they were never taught they had value, how they attract relationships that replicate the dynamic, partners who criticize, friends who take without giving, jobs where they're overworked and underappreciated, because familiar feels like love when you've never known anything else. I read about the long-term effects, anxiety, depression, chronic guilt, difficulty setting boundaries, a voice in your head that sounds like your parents constantly telling you you're not good enough. I had all of it, every single symptom, and I thought it was just me, my personality, my failure. But wasn't. It was conditioning, 30 years of conditioning. I found a checklist, signs you were the family scapegoat. I went through it line by line. You were blamed for things that weren't your fault. Yes. Your feelings were dismissed or mocked. Yes. You were compared unfavorably to siblings. Yes. You were expected to be perfect while others were excused for mistakes. Yes. You felt like you could never do anything right. Yes, yes, yes. 23 out of 25. I sat there, staring at the screen, and I started to cry. Not sad crying, angry crying, relieved crying, because for the first time in my life, I had a name for what happened to me. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't me being too sensitive. It was real. It was a pattern. It had a name, and I wasn't alone. I read stories from other scapegoats, women my age who'd just figured it out, men who'd gone no contact with their families, parents who'd recognized the pattern and broken it with their own children. I read about healing, about therapy, about boundaries, about the moment you realize the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally couldn't. And that wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading, learning, grieving the childhood I didn't have, the parents I needed but never got, the version of myself who believed she was broken. By the time the sun came up, something had shifted. I wasn't the problem. I never was. I was just assigned a role in someone else's dysfunction, and I'd played it perfectly for 30 years. But I didn't have to play it anymore. The next Sunday, I had a choice to make. I could keep showing up, keep exposing my daughter to the same treatment I'd endured, keep teaching her that love means making yourself small. Or I could do something I'd never done before, something that terrified me. I could set a boundary. I could protect her, even if it meant losing them. Sunday morning came. Emma was getting ready, putting on the dress my mother had bought her, the dress that was too small, but Emma wore anyway because she didn't want to hurt Grandma's feelings. 7 years old and already trained to ignore her own discomfort to manage someone else's emotions, just like I was. I watched her struggle with the zipper, and I thought, what am I teaching her? If I keep bringing her here, keep exposing her to this, I'm teaching her that love looks like criticism, that family means accepting mistreatment, that her worth is conditional, that she should shrink to make others comfortable. I'm teaching her everything they taught me, and it almost destroyed me. I made a decision. I sent a text to my mother. We won't be coming over today, or for a while. I need some space to think about our relationship. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. My hands were shaking. Emma asked, "Aren't we going to Grandma's?" I said, "Not today, baby. Let's go to the park instead. She smiled. Relieved. She was relieved. That should have told me everything. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. Again. 5 times. Then a text. What is this about? Call me immediately. Then another. You're being ridiculous. We're expecting you. Then, your father is very upset. Of course, make it about his feelings, not mine. Never mine. I turned my phone off. Emma and I went to the park. We got ice cream, we fed the ducks, she laughed, she played. She was light, free. And I realized she was always tense at my parents' house, always careful, walking on eggshells just like I did. I'd been so normalized to it that I didn't even see it. But it was there. The hypervigilance, the constant monitoring of moods, the fear of doing something wrong. She was 7 and she was already learning to be small. That night, after Emma was asleep, I listened to the voicemail. My mother's voice was cold, controlled, angry. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is very hurtful. We've done nothing but support you your entire life. You're being dramatic and selfish. Call me back and apologize. Your father and I deserve better than this. Support me? They'd ignored every achievement, dismissed every emotion, compared me endlessly to Sarah, blamed me for their unhappiness. That was support? And now I was supposed to apologize? For what? For protecting my child? For finally saying enough? I called back, not to apologize, to explain. My mother answered on the first ring. Before I could speak, she started, I cannot believe you would do this to us. Do you know how embarrassed we were telling Sarah and her family you weren't coming? What will people think? What will people think? Not how are you feeling, not what happened, just appearances. Always appearances. I took a breath. I'd practiced what I wanted to say. I'd written it down. I needed to stay calm, factual. I said, Mom, last week when Emma spilled water, you spoke to her the same way you used to speak to me. You called her clumsy. You compared her to Sarah's daughter. You made her feel bad about a simple accident. And I can't let that happen to her. I won't. Silence. Then, you're being too sensitive. I was just teaching her to be more careful. That's what grandmothers do. No, that's what critical grandmothers do. Loving grandmothers, comfort, reassure, build up, not tear down. I said, I'm not too sensitive. I'm finally seeing clearly, and I need space. From you, from Dad, from these Sunday dinners where I smile and pretend everything's fine when it's not. I need to figure out what a healthy relationship with you looks like, if that's even possible. Her voice changed, harder. So, you're choosing to abandon your family because of a spilled glass of water? This is exactly why Sarah was always the easier child. You're dramatic. You create problems where there are none. You always have. And there it was, the truth she'd been holding back for 30 years. Sarah was easier because Sarah played her role, the golden child who soaked up praise and attention. I was difficult because I had the audacity to feel things, need things, exist. I said, quietly, I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm protecting my daughter and myself. I hope one day you'll understand that. She said, don't expect me to be here when you come to your senses. You're making a huge mistake. And she hung up. No goodbye. No, I love you. Just a wall. The same wall that had been there my entire life. I'd just finally stopped pretending it was a door. I thought cutting contact would feel like failure, like I was giving up on my family, like I was proving them right, that I was dramatic, difficult, the problem child they always said I was. But what happened next surprised me. In the silence they left behind, I started to hear myself again, for the first time in 30 years. The first week was hard. I kept checking my phone, waiting for an apology that never came, waiting for them to realize they'd hurt me, waiting for them to choose me, just once. But the phone stayed silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. And slowly I realized this was their pattern too. When I didn't play my role, when I didn't absorb their dysfunction and apologize for existing, they had no use for me. My sister called once, not to check on me, to scold me. "Mom is devastated," she said. "You really hurt her. She doesn't understand what she did wrong." I almost laughed. Of course she didn't understand. She'd never had to. I'd spent 30 years making excuses for her, smoothing things over, pretending her cruelty was love. And the one time I stopped, I became the villain. Sarah said, "You know how she is. You're too sensitive. You always take things personally." There it was again. Too sensitive. The words they'd used to silence me my entire life. I said, "Sarah, she told Emma she was clumsy for spilling water. She made a 7-year-old feel ashamed for having an accident. Does that sound okay to you?" Silence. Then, "Kids need to learn consequences." I said, "Consequences for what? Being human?" Sarah sighed, that same exasperated sigh I'd heard 1,000 times. "Look, I don't have time for your drama. Fix this. Apologize to Mom. Stop being difficult." And she hung up. Just like that. No, "How are you?" No, "I hear you." Just get back in line. Play your role. Make Mom happy so I don't have to deal with her being upset. That's when I understood something crucial. Sarah wasn't the enemy. She was trapped too, in her own role. The golden child, who could do no wrong, but also couldn't ever be imperfect. She had to maintain the image, be the successful one, the easy one, the one who made our parents proud. If she acknowledged that they were flawed, that their treatment of me was wrong, her entire identity would crumble. So she didn't. She couldn't. And I couldn't save her from that. I could only save myself. Week 2 was easier. I stopped checking my phone. I started noticing things. How much lighter I felt in the mornings. How I didn't dread Sundays anymore. How Emma seemed happier, less anxious. She stopped apologizing for every little thing. She stopped asking, "Is this okay?" before she did anything. She just played, laughed, existed without fear. I'd given her something I never had. Permission to be herself. I started therapy. I told my therapist everything. The comparisons, the dismissals, the way I'd learned to shrink. She listened. Really listened. And then she said something that broke me open. "You survived by making yourself small, but you don't have to survive anymore. You can live." I cried. I cried for the 8-year-old who learned she didn't matter. For the 16-year-old whose achievements were invisible. For the 22-year-old who stood alone at her own graduation. For the 30-year-old who almost let this cycle continue. My therapist taught me about boundaries. Real boundaries. Not walls, not cruelty, just limits. I will not accept this treatment. I will not have this conversation. I deserve respect. Simple sentences that felt impossible to say because I'd been trained to believe that boundaries were selfish, that saying no meant I was difficult, that protecting myself meant I was the problem. We worked on reparenting, on giving myself the love I never got, on speaking to myself the way I wished my mother had. Instead of "you're too sensitive," I learned to say, "your feelings are valid." Instead of "you're causing problems," I learned to say, "you deserve to be heard." Instead of "why can't you be more like her?" I learned to say, "you are enough exactly as you are." It felt ridiculous at first, saying these things to myself in the mirror, but slowly, I started to believe them. Month 2. Still no contact from my parents. But something strange happened. I stopped wanting it. I stopped waiting for the apology, the acknowledgement, the sudden realization that they'd been wrong. Because I finally understood they would never give it to me. Not because I didn't deserve it, but because admitting they'd hurt me would mean admitting they were flawed, and their entire identity was built on being right, being the victims of my difficulty. They needed me to be the problem, because if I wasn't the problem, they'd have to look at themselves. I started journaling, writing down memories I'd suppressed, times they'd hurt me that I'd minimized or forgotten. I filled 3 notebooks. 3 notebooks of small cruelties, dismissals, comparisons, moments where I'd needed them and they'd chosen Sarah, or themselves, or appearances, never me. Reading it back was devastating and liberating because I wasn't imagining it. It wasn't in my head. It was real, documented, undeniable. My husband noticed the change. He said, "You seem different. Lighter." I was. For 30 years, I'd carried the weight of their dysfunction, their unhappiness, their refusal to heal. I'd made it my job to fix them, to manage their emotions, to be perfect enough that maybe they'd finally love me properly. But I couldn't fix them. I could only fix myself. And that started with putting the weight down.
3 months passed. No calls, no apologies, no acknowledgement. I'd started to build a new life, one where I wasn't constantly bracing for criticism, where I could breathe. But then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. My heart raced. After 3 months of silence, what could she possibly have to say?
Before I tell you what the text said, I need to explain something. Those 3 months of silence weren't empty. They were full of grief, full of anger, full of healing I didn't know I needed. I grieved the mother I never had, the one who was supposed to protect me, champion me, love me unconditionally. I grieved the childhood I deserved but didn't get, the validation, the encouragement, the safety. I grieved the version of myself who believed she was broken, who apologized for taking up space, who made herself small so others could feel big. That version of me had survived. She'd kept me alive through 30 years of emotional neglect and scapegoating, but she didn't serve me anymore. And letting her go was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I also got angry, really angry. For years, I'd suppressed it. Anger wasn't allowed. Scapegoats don't get to be angry. We get to be compliant, understanding, endlessly forgiving. But in therapy, I learned anger is information. It tells you when a boundary has been crossed, when you've been harmed, when something is wrong. And I had decades of anger I'd never let myself feel. I screamed into pillows. I wrote letters I never sent, filled with every hurt, every dismissal, every moment they chose Sarah over me. I let myself feel the full weight of what they'd done, not to punish them, but to honor myself, to say, this happened. It was wrong, and I deserved better. My therapist said, anger is a bridge. You have to cross it to get to acceptance, but you don't have to live there. So I crossed it. I felt every burning, justified bit of rage. And then I let it go. I started building a new relationship with myself, one not based on achievement or perfection or making others comfortable. I learned to ask, what do I need? What do I want? What feels good to me? Simple questions I'd never asked before because my needs didn't matter. But they did. They do. I started saying no to things I didn't want to do. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped apologizing for having feelings. I reconnected with old friends I'd drifted from, friends who'd tried to tell me, gently, that my family's treatment wasn't normal. I'd defended my parents back then, made excuses. But now, I called them. I said, "You were right. I'm sorry I didn't hear you." They didn't say, "I told you so." They just said, "I'm glad you see it now. How can I support you?" That's what real love looks like. Not, "I told you so," just, "I'm here." Emma and I started new Sunday traditions. We baked together, went to museums, had picnics in the park. I watched her blossom. She started speaking up when she didn't like something, setting her own small boundaries. "I don't want to wear that dress. It's itchy." And I said, "Okay, baby, you don't have to." So simple, but revolutionary. I was giving her permission to honor her own needs, something I never had. My husband and I grew closer. I'd always held him at arm's length, afraid that if he saw the real me, the broken, difficult, too much me, he'd leave. But I started letting him in, telling him about my childhood, my pain, my fears. And he didn't leave. He held me. He said, "You were never too much. You were just with people who couldn't hold you." I cried, because I'd spent 30 years believing I was unlovable. But I wasn't. I was just unloved by people who should have loved me. There's a difference. I read books, dozens of them, on family scapegoating, narcissistic family systems, trauma, healing. I learned that what happened to me had a name: complex PTSD. I learned about reparenting, inner child work, nervous system regulation. I learned that healing isn't linear. Some days I felt strong. Other days I felt like that 8-year-old again, desperate for my mother's approval. Both were okay. Both were part of the process. I started noticing patterns in my life, how I'd always chosen jobs where I was overworked and underappreciated, how I'd had friendships that were one-sided, where I gave everything and received crumbs. I dated people before my husband who treated me like I was lucky they tolerated me. I'd been recreating the dynamic, looking for people who made me feel the way my family did, because familiar felt like home, even when home was painful. But I didn't have to do that anymore. I started surrounding myself with people who saw my worth, who celebrated my successes instead of minimizing them, who held space for my emotions instead of dismissing them. I started choosing differently, and my life changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily, surely. I was building something new, something healthy, something mine. I also started thinking about forgiveness, not the kind where I pretended it didn't hurt, not the kind where I let them back in without change, but the kind where I released the hold they had on me, where I stopped waiting for them to validate my pain, where I accepted they are who they are. They may never change. They may never apologize. They may never see what they did. And I could still heal. I could still move forward. I could still build a beautiful life. Without their permission, without their acknowledgement, I could heal anyway. That's where I was, 3 months in. Stronger, clearer, freer. I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I'd stopped checking my phone every morning hoping for an apology. I'd stopped playing out imaginary conversations where they finally understood. I'd accepted. This might be it. They may never reach out. And I'd be okay. I'd be more than okay. I was already more than okay.
And then the text came. Tuesday afternoon, Emma was at school, I was folding laundry. My phone buzzed. My mother's name. My stomach dropped. Old habits. Even after 3 months of healing, my body still remembered, still braced. I almost didn't open it, but I did. It said, "I've been thinking about what you said.
Maybe I was too hard on you growing up. I don't know. I did my best. But I miss seeing Emma. Can we talk? I read it 3 times. Maybe I was too hard on you. Not, I was wrong. Not, I'm sorry. Just, maybe. I did my best. The eternal excuse. The shield against accountability. I did my best, so you're not allowed to be hurt. I sat down. My hands were shaking. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. Sort of. An acknowledgement. Kind of. Not the full apology I deserved, not the reckoning I had imagined, but something. More than I'd expected, less than I needed. I didn't respond right away. I called my therapist. Emergency session. She asked, "What do you want?" Not what did my mother want. What did I want? I said, "I don't know. Part of me wants to believe she's changed. Part of me knows this isn't enough. Part of me just wants a mom." She said, "All of those parts are valid. Take your time. You don't owe her an immediate response. You don't owe her anything." That felt radical. I don't owe her anything. Even though she's my mother, even though family is supposed to matter, I didn't owe her my pain, my forgiveness, my compliance. I sat with it for 2 days. I wrote responses and deleted them. I imagined scenarios. Maybe she really had reflected. Maybe she'd done her own work. Maybe this was the beginning of something different. Or maybe it was the same pattern. A shallow acknowledgement, just enough to get me back in line, and then business as usual. I didn't know. But I knew this. I couldn't go back to who I was. I couldn't unknow what I'd learned. I couldn't unsee the pattern. I decided to respond, but on my terms. I wrote, "I appreciate you reaching out. I've missed you too. But I need more than maybe I was too hard on you. I need you to understand how your words and actions affected me, how they're affecting Emma now. I need to know that things will be different, that you're willing to listen, to change. If you are, I'm open to talking. But I won't go back to the way things were. I can't." I hit send, and I waited. Hours passed. No response. Then, at 10 p.m., my phone rang. My mother. I answered. "Hello?" She said, "I got your text. I don't understand what you want from me. I apologized. I said maybe I was too hard. What more do you want? You're never satisfied. This is why it's so difficult with you." And there it was. The mask slipped. 3 months of silence, 1 half apology, and we were right back where we started. I was the problem. I was too demanding. I was difficult. I took a breath. I felt my therapist's voice in my head. "You don't have to engage. You can set a boundary." I said, calmly, "Mom, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to see me, to acknowledge the specific ways you hurt me, to commit to doing things differently. If you can't do that, I don't think we can have a relationship right now." Silence. Then ice cold. "Fine. If that's how you want it, don't come crying to me when you realize what you've lost." And she hung up. I stood there, phone in my hand, and I felt okay. Not devastated, not shattered, just sad. Sad that she chose her pride over her daughter. Sad that she'd rather lose me than admit she was wrong. Sad that this was how it ended. But also relieved, because I'd given her a chance. I'd set a clear boundary, and she chose not to meet it. That wasn't on me. That was on her. I'd done everything I could, and it still wasn't enough for her. But it was enough for me.
I thought that would be the end, that she'd never reach out again, that I'd lost my family for good. And for a while, it was. Months passed, silence. But life didn't stop. I kept healing, kept growing.
kept building a life where I mattered. And then, 6 months later, something unexpected happened, something I never saw coming. 6 months after that phone call, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, from my mother. I almost didn't open it. I'd built a good life in those 6 months. Emma was thriving. I was thriving. I didn't know if I was ready to let the pain back in. But curiosity won. I opened it. It was 3 pages. She wrote about her own childhood, how her mother had been critical, impossible to please, how she'd spent her whole life trying to be perfect, to prove she was worthy, how she'd passed that on to me without realizing it, how she didn't know how to show love because she'd never really received it, how she saw herself in me and that scared her, so she pushed me away. She wrote, "I'm not good at this," apologizing, admitting I'm wrong, but I've been thinking a lot, and I think you were right. I was too hard on you. I made you feel like you had to earn my love, and you never did. You always had it. I just didn't know how to show it. I don't know if I can change. I don't know if it's too late, but I want to try, if you'll let me. I cried, not because it fixed everything. It didn't. Not because it erased 30 years of pain. It couldn't. But because it was real, vulnerable, honest, more honest than she'd ever been with me. She didn't blame me. She didn't make excuses. She just owned it. And that meant something. Not everything, but something. I wrote back. I said, "Thank you for your honesty. I appreciate you sharing that. But healing isn't instant. Trust isn't rebuilt in a day. If you want a relationship with me, with Emma, it has to be different. I need you to respect my boundaries, to listen when I tell you something hurt me, to stop comparing me to Sarah, to see Emma as her own person, not an extension of anyone else. Can you do that?" She wrote back, "I can try. I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can try." And that was enough for now. Not a full reconciliation, not a return to weekly dinners and pretending everything was fine, but a tentative, boundaried, honest attempt at something new. We started small. Phone calls, once a month. Supervised visits with Emma at a park. Neutral territory with me present the whole time. My mother was different. Not transformed. She still had her moments. But when I called her out calmly, clearly, she'd pause, apologize, try again. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes she'd slip back into old patterns. But I had my boundaries now, and I enforced them. That comment hurt Emma. "Please don't say things like that." She'd bristle, then breathe, then say, "You're right. I'm sorry." Progress. Slow, imperfect, but real. I learned something important. Healing doesn't mean reconciliation. You can heal without your abuser ever acknowledging the harm. You can move forward without their apology. You can build a beautiful life without their permission. I'd already started doing that. The reconciliation wasn't the healing. It was just a bonus, a small gift I hadn't expected. But I didn't need it. I was already whole. I also learned some people can't change. My father never apologized, never acknowledged his role. He went along with my mother's attempts at rebuilding, but he never did his own work. And that's okay. I accepted it. I didn't need him to change. I just needed to protect myself from the harm he was still capable of inflicting. So I kept boundaries there too. Polite, distant, safe. Sarah and I, that's more complicated. She still doesn't see it, doesn't understand why I made such a big deal out of everything, doesn't recognize her role as the golden child, and the cost it carried. And I've accepted she may never. Our relationship is cordial, surface level. I love her, but I don't expect her to understand me, and I don't need her to. I have other people who do. Emma is 12 now. She's confident, assertive. She knows her worth. She doesn't apologize for taking up space. She doesn't shrink to make others comfortable. She sets boundaries with her friends, with teachers, even with me and her dad. And I'm so proud, because I broke the cycle. The scapegoating, the people-pleasing, the belief that love is conditional, it ends with me. She'll have her own struggles, her own pain, but it won't be this. I made sure of that. People ask me, do you regret cutting contact? Do you regret setting that boundary? And I say no, not even a little. Because that boundary saved me. It saved Emma. It gave me space to heal, to grow, to discover who I was without their voices in my head telling me I wasn't enough. I needed that distance. And if my mother hadn't eventually done the work, I'd still be okay. Because I learned the most important lesson. I don't need their approval. I don't need their validation. I am enough. I always was. The problem was never me. It was the role they needed me to play. The scapegoat, the difficult one, the too sensitive, too much, never enough daughter. That was their story, not mine. And the day I stopped believing it, the day I stopped playing that role, my life began. Really, truly began. Not despite them, not because of them, but for me. Finally, for me.
If you've ever been told you're too much or not enough, if you've spent years wondering why nothing you do is ever right, if you've carried shame that was never yours to carry, I want you to hear this. You're not broken. You're not the problem. You were just assigned a role in someone else's dysfunction, a role you didn't ask for and never deserved. Maybe you were the scapegoat in your family, the one who absorbed all the blame, all the criticism, all the impossible standards. Maybe you're still playing that role. Maybe you're reading this and thinking, but what if they're right? What if I am the problem? Let me tell you, you're not. The fact that you're questioning yourself, that you're trying so hard to understand, to improve, to fix things, that's proof. Because truly difficult people don't do that. They don't reflect. They don't grow. They don't take responsibility. You've been taking responsibility for things that were never your fault, for other people's pain, dysfunction, refusal to heal. And you don't have to carry that anymore. You can put it down. You can set boundaries. You can protect yourself. You can choose differently. And that doesn't make you selfish. It makes you wise. Healing is possible, with or without them. With or without reconciliation, acknowledgement, apology, you can heal anyway. You can build a life where you're valued, seen, loved for exactly who you are, where you don't have to shrink, where you don't have to earn love, where you just are. And that's enough. If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. There are millions of us, scapegoats who survived and are learning to thrive, who are breaking cycles and choosing differently, who are finally, after years of being told we're the problem, realizing the truth. The problem was never us, and we deserve better. We always did. I still have hard days. Days when the old voices creep back in. Days when I doubt myself, when I wonder if I'm being too harsh, too unforgiving. But then I look at my daughter. I see her confidence, her joy, her complete certainty that she is loved, valued, worthy. And I know I made the right choice. Breaking the cycle doesn't mean you stop loving your family. It means you start loving yourself enough to say, I deserve better, and I'm going to create it, for me
for my daughter, for every generation that comes after. The scapegoat role is powerful. It can define your entire life, or it can be the catalyst for your transformation. The moment you realize you're playing a role is the moment you can choose to stop, to step out of the story they wrote for you and write your own. I chose healing. I chose myself. And I hope, wherever you are in your journey, you choose yourself too. Because you're worth it. You always have been.